Now, before we jump into the content of this insane episode of Wonder Egg Priority, we do have to discuss the elephant in the room. To no real surprise if you've been following what's been happening behind the scenes with Wonder Egg Priority, there's another episode planned. Essentially, what we just watched was the original planned episode 11. The recap happened around the episode 7 mark, and it was unplanned. Now, the production committee made it seem like it was. The people controlling the distribution were acting and trying to cover up that this production had a lot of hell going on behind the scenes. I think it was the main director or producer was hospitalized a couple of times and, had to rush back. The thing with this show is it was built out of passion, a lot of new people and a lot of fresh ideas wanting to create something different and unique, and it just seems like it was a bit more than they could ever create. And in doing so, they lost an episode or they lost a time slot on TV. Usually what happens is, they work around it and they'll give a production an extra episode or the following week. It seems like Wonder Egg just could never make its episode 12, so instead what's going to happen is episode 13, or the true episode 12, will be coming out at the end of June with the Blu-ray and DVD release. So we will get an ending. This isn't all that there is. But yeah, it was a messy ride. The production committee were very scummy with how they were handling up the cover-up. The people behind it were trying to make this pure of passion, doing something different, and whether you like the past couple episodes or not, you can't say this was a money grab or anything like this. They were trying to create something of their passion and vision, and it definitely shows in the quality. And even in an episode like this that kicks off with one of the most obvious still frame shots ever, where very little moves and what does move has hardly any detail because they couldn't animate every single thing in this show to the same quality that it started out. This episode was finished like a couple of hours before it broadcasted in Japan. Like, this production was hell. And usually I wouldn't touch upon this type of stuff and wouldn't, waste people's time, as some people like to tell me when I do talk about this stuff. But I think it's important to know because there's going to be essentially a 3-month delay before we get the last episode and see the ending. Of course, I will review it, but I do want to make that known that it just was too big of a production for the team to handle. Things happened, things spiraled out of control. We'll get the last episode, which is much better than what some people were fearing, that maybe we just wouldn't get it at all. Now, as for the episode itself, this was, without a doubt, I would say the most fascinatingly and confusing episode all at the same time. It deals with parallel worlds. It deals with the idea that if in one world, essentially, if you want a very easy to digest way, in one world you pick up an apple, in another world you didn't. Every action, there's an opposite action in a different parallel world that creates its own individual universe and entity and things like that. The last egg that Ai has to crack is of herself, where she killed herself in a different world because she didn't have the same level of support with her friend who ultimately killed herself. Now, this was a very interesting episode, especially considering that there wasn't anything visually different about the two eyes, so it was very easy to lose your footing and understand which side we were focusing on. Now, Mr. Sawaki has been a character that a lot of people have been speculating on. Is he a predator? Is he a foe? And there's a lot of really interesting ideas floating around about what this episode represents, and I feel like even more so than when I made Season Roundup and I talked about how I think this will be a show that will be remembered for many years to come. I think this episode even takes that comment even further, because the idea of interpretation and not fully knowing what we just saw is a big factor, I think, in terms of what you're supposed to take away from this episode. And maybe the next episode that comes out, obviously in June, will clarify it even further, or maybe it'll be kept a little more open-ended and up to your interpretation. But the things that kind of seem like they do boil down to was, obviously, the Ai we've been following didn't kill herself. And it seems like the Ai that we have been following had a crush on the teacher. And in this world, she ended up supporting her mother after kind of pushing away and wanting all the attention for herself. In doing so, she supported the mother, and it seems like the relationship will probably happen fine because she has her friend, she has those supporting her. And there came a point where, she tried to kill herself, her friend pulled her up. And there's a comment made in this episode about how she was a fake friend, and was that anything even worthwhile? Some people are taking that of, was she ever even real to begin with? Other people saying, no, it clearly means that the teacher never had a relationship with someone like Ai, though Ai clearly loved the teacher. But the teacher did have a relationship with the student, but it seems like it was, even though technically illegal, they were equally in love or something like that, or maybe the teacher was simply just trying to help her overcome the idea that, hey, I understand how you feel, but you can't feel this way. And ultimately, she ended up killing herself when the bullies and things like that got to her. And instead of Ai going with her, probably like they originally intended, she did it herself. And there's a lot of different ways to take away from it. But what I find very, very interesting is how if you look at it from the parallel world eye and how Mr. Sawaki is kind of like, the character that we have to defeat in order to overcome this trauma, it very much comes across as, the teacher was a predator. He was someone who, preyed on the student, and most likely Koto, or whatever her name was, right? She wanted to be in a relationship with him. Maybe she actually was. I was jealous of that. But then when you flip it on his head and you look at how he interacts with her and how she's no longer clouded by these disgusting goggles as she sees him. As soon as she sees who she has to fight, she says, "You can't be Mr. Sawaki. He's a lot nicer," and he's saying, "Oh, you just got fooled by me." It very much feels to me that the Ai that we've been following from the beginning, and then obviously towards the end, the way she originally perceived Mr. Sawaki made the viewer see him in a very negative, demonic light. But as her friends, Rika, Momo, Nehru all said, he seemed like a fine guy, and it seemingly turned out to be true. I have a feeling that in this world, he didn't do anything to her friend. I really feel that way. I feel like most likely she had a crush on him, and in doing so he pushed back saying it can never be, and then she probably killed herself. But on the flip side, there was probably a parallel world where he did end up in a relationship with her. And I think this episode was meant to represent the many possibilities that Mr. Sawaki can be a predator in some worlds, and in others he's a normal teacher who falls in love with Ai's mother. But based on what we're seeing and based on Ai's remarks towards the Sawaki that we have grown to know and understand, it seems like he actually was a nice guy, and the reason he seemed so creepy for many of the episodes was because Ai wanted us to see him that way. But once she accepted and once she was no longer jealous because she had a crush on him originally, and most likely was very envious and jealous of what was happening with her friend and what she thought was happening between her friend and the teacher, that's kind of what happened. To me, this is an episode that's supposed to make you understand that, yes, they introduce parallel worlds. Maybe people won't like that. As a big science fiction nerd, I love Doctor Who. I love anything that deals with timeline manipulation. That's why I like Steins Gate, things like that. What I absolutely love about this is it says, if you don't like the main story, right? If you wanted Mr. Sawaki to be a truly nice guy or a truly negative guy, there's a world out there in Wonder Egg Priority that has that exact same thing happening. But from my interpretation, which I think no one can really say right or wrong until we see the last episode truly, it seems like that in, obviously, the Ai that we were trying to save in this episode, she killed herself and she viewed him as a very disgusting creature, and he probably was. But on the flip side, the one that we've been following for all this time seemingly was a good guy all the time. And once I supported him, we finally started to see him as he truly was. And even though there's different realities where he probably wasn't, it's very interesting to see that. And I think the scenes where he was talking to, Koto and saying like how, young love is great and you should kill yourself before you're an adult, I think that is supposed to represent like an alternate reality, not the one we actually followed, which I think is very, very fascinating. And I think even though this wasn't the flashiest episode at times, we know the production issues that they were having. This episode was from the heart. It's not like this episode randomly came from left field. This is always what they were building up to. It's just originally this was supposed to be episode 11, not 12, so now we have to wait for the true episode 12, titled episode 13, or the bonus special, that will actually wrap it all up. It's not the first time it's happened in anime. I remember when Kekai Sensen was airing, they had to wait, I forget how long, I feel like it might have been a year, or quite a few months anyway, before they got to see their ending. It's unfortunate, but I would much rather the team not put themselves in the hospital anymore to finish this episode and have a few months to make it rather than a week like they've been doing for the past couple of episodes. To me, this was without doubt the most fascinating episode. It's going to be an episode I'm going to be thinking about for many months to come, and I think without a doubt, even if I don't have time to rewatch the entirety of Wonder Egg Priority, I think episodes 11 and 12 will be episodes I rewatch before jumping into episode 13 and kind of like seeing where they take us in the final episode. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas at play. I think there's going to be so many interesting interpretations of what this episode meant and what Sawaki meant, what the suicide angle meant. There's a lot of visual storytelling at play, but it's definitely one of those things where there's a lot of worlds out there, and the one we've been following has been a lot more interesting than I think many of us have gave it credit for. I'd love to know everyone's thoughts and feelings, though. I know this isn't the most it's more of an assumption review, I guess is the best way to put it, but I think that's kind of what this episode was meant to be. But then again, it'll be interesting to see everyone's thoughts and opinions. I've already gotten quite a few comments saying how confusing it was, so hopefully my ramblings, I guess people kind of like to use those in order to understand an episode. I'm still piecing it together myself, but it's one I've been thinking about for a few hours. Usually I jump up and just review it right off the bat, but I took a few hours to kind of sit back, read up on some people's thoughts, and it's a great episode for that alone. But let me know your feelings down below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, show your support, and hit that subscribe button if you happen to be around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.